Hi, everybody, and welcome to News of the Day. I am editor for Noted, Dr. Tom Rifai, lifestyle medicine specialist. And on behalf of the True Health Initiative, we are truly honored to welcome Dr. Neal Barnard, who is an adjunct professor of medicine at George Washington University School of Medicine and the president of the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. And if you don't know Dr. Barnard, because we realize there are a lot of lifestyle curious people coming to this page, and some of you, of course, may well know, but to make a long story short, Dr. Barnard has led innumerable research studies investigating effects of food and nutrition on diabetes and body weight. In fact, we'll be discussing the most recent one on Mediterranean versus a healthy vegan, which will be a great discussion, as well as other issues, chronic pain, and much of the studies funded by the National Institutes of Health. So Dr. Barnard has been published tons of times, scientific peer-reviewed publications, including this one. And we just want to welcome you, Dr. Barnard, today at Noted. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you, Tom. It's great to be with you today.
Wonderful. And as we were discussing it at some point earlier, none of us has had a really classical path to lifestyle medicine and nutrition, because there really wasn't any. And even these days, as we're trying to pioneer some sort of formalized path, there really hasn't been. We've all found our own way. So you've pioneered yourself through to that leadership. Tell us a little bit about how that happened for you.
Actually, yeah, I think what you're saying is exactly right, Tom. There isn't really a pathway for it. And it's not just in our professional careers, but even in our personal lives. I grew up in North Dakota, and every day of my life, it was roast beef, baked potatoes, and corn, except for special occasions when it was roast beef, baked potatoes, and peas. But, we didn't think about the healthfulness of what we were eating. And I think what started for me was the year before I went to medical school, I was working at a hospital in Minneapolis, and I was the autopsy assistant. And whenever anybody died in a hospital, I would help the pathologist with the autopsy. And you learn so much. And one day we had a person who died in the hospital of a massive coronary. And the pathologist knew I was going to be going to medical school. So he said, watch carefully. And the first thing is you take what looks like a garden clipper, and you just cut through the ribs and you pull the ribs off the chest to expose the heart. And it's not done with great delicacy. You just kind of hack through the ribs and remove this big pie wedge and put it on the table. And that exposed the heart. And he opened up the coronary arteries and had me look inside, and put on gloves. I could feel this crunchy calcium deposits inside the arteries. And they were not only in the coronaries, they were in the carotids, they were in the arteries going to the legs, the arteries to the kidneys. And he would kind of joke, this is your bacon and eggs that does this. Anyhow, at the end of the exam, he left, and I had to clean up. And so, I put the ribs back in the chest and sewed up the skin and everything. And when I was done, I went up to the cafeteria where they were serving ribs for lunch. And I gotta tell you, I looked at it, and it looked like the dead body, and it smelled like it. And I didn't become a vegetarian on the spot, but something registered in my brain that said, don't eat that. And I don't know what you'd call that. That's not exactly scientific, but that's kind of what got me going. And then as time went on, I learned more about it. I started medical school, started putting two and two together, and I started then changing my own diet. And then as time went on, I started to appreciate how much of our collective disease burden reflects the choices that we have made, particularly in relation to diet.
No kidding, and such a difficult decision with the saturation of the environment. What I sometimes call, with all due respect to anyone's sensitive ears, the crap sad, or the calorie-rich and processed standard American diet. It's
Right.
Constantly overwhelming us. And so I love that story. I never knew that at all. I'm not sure if you've ever told that story before, but if you, even if you have, I appreciate that. So our listeners get a real background for not only the science background you have, but the passion that you have. You've led numerous studies, but today we're really focusing on one right, hot off the press, if you will. And something that you and I discussed some lamentations we both have about what, with all due respect for people who may be doing a particular version of it, but the possible overrating, if you will, of the Mediterranean diet. But Be that as it may, let me not say any more, and just give us an idea about the background of that study, what led to it, and then the design and the findings.
Well, Mediterranean diets are hugely popular. Every year, US News and World Report ranks them #1 diet. It's effective, prevents heart disease, real easy to follow. Everyone loves it. And frankly, it sounds kind of romantic. You know, who wouldn't want to be going down the coast toward Naples, Italy, and anticipating a glass of red wine by the seashore at a, it's kind of some sunset restaurant and that kind of thing. So it just sounds great. And if you recommend it to a patient, they're never going to balk because it sounds great. However, back many years ago, a trial was done in Lyon, France. And although the diet did seem to reduce cardiac events, it didn't do anything for body weight, which is a problem because a lot of people, their reason for wanting to change their diet is they've got weight they do not want. They know it's going to lead to diabetes and so forth. The Lyon trial, weight actually increased. And then a huge study done in Spain, and a very, very good study called the PREDIMED study, where they brought in 7,000 people. They had heart disease, or they were at high risk for heart disease. And same story. It caused a modest reduction in cardiac events, but it didn't cause weight loss at all, and it just wasn't working. And so we had this sort of conflict. On the one hand, I am quite convinced that a typical Mediterranean diet is better than what most people are doing now. It's more of an emphasis on vegetables and fruits and, not so much butter, focusing on olive oil. That's got to be good. But on the other hand, we have all this data showing that when people follow it, their weight doesn't come down, their cholesterols don't come down, except there was one study, a sub-study of PREDIMED, where they showed that those people who were doing a Mediterranean diet, but they were doing it more vegan. In other words, their version of a Mediterranean diet wasn't fish with pasta, it was tomato sauce with pasta or whatever. They did better than everybody else. So we decided, all right, best way to do this is to compare a Mediterranean diet to a low-fat, healthy vegan diet, but not in similar populations, in exactly the same people. So we brought in a group of people, 62 people. They were randomly assigned to one or the other diet. After 16 weeks, they switched and they did the opposite diet. And so that gave us a really perfect basis for comparison.
In real world too, I think one of the things I noticed and what somewhat led to this was this critique. And I found it interesting that there was a critique of not controlling for calories, which for me tells me that it's not real world, because once you do that, you've completely removed it from the ability to be applicable in the real world. You had people follow what was generally guided, and they ate to satiety. They weren't necessarily told exactly how much to eat. Am I correct? They were able to.
Yeah. Yeah. There are different ways of doing research studies. And there are some people who do metabolic ward studies where you take control away from the participant. You say, I'm going to put on a plate exactly what I want you to eat. I'm going to control your calories. I'm going to control your fat intake and so forth. And that allows you to do certain kind of measurements. But that's not what we wanted to do. We wanted to see if a person is following a vegan diet or a Mediterranean diet, and they're given guidance by their provider on how to do it, and then they're making their own choices at home, with their families, in restaurants, and they're interpreting in their way. But we're giving them a lot of support. In this case, everybody came in once a week. They had classes, and the classes were led by registered dietitians who believed in their respective diet and used it in practice and followed it themselves. So we had Mediterranean-oriented dietitians and vegan-oriented dietitians, but it gave people a lot of support. But what you're saying, Tom, is the key, is we want to see what happens if a person actually does this in real life, making their own food.
And with PREDIMED, you made a point, I think, that many of the curious, for instance, who might want to find where, as I say, reality meets science, and what's kind of a takeaway here is increasing your intake of minimally processed plants is going to do good almost really no matter how you what you where you start from. And I was also noting that when you mentioned first back when you were growing up. Hey, the peas at least were some legumes, right? I mean, legumes, I believe, are a super beautiful source of nutrition that maybe we can all jump on the same page and agree, whether you're talking about, protein or fiber or anything else. That being said, this is applicable to real world type study that provides us some information. And we had a brief discussion about how it's, consistent with the first law of thermodynamics, which some people may feel has been disproven in some way, but really doesn't. That it helps people and there may be other ways to do it. I'm well known as a flexitarian, but whatever the case may be, the concept of having a healthy, high nutrient density and moderation of calorie density and allowing people to feel full on lesser calorie intake. Is that one takeaway from the study?
Well, what we found is as the weeks went by, the people in the low-fat vegan diet did lose weight. And that was no surprise because we've seen that in one study after another. We've done this in healthy young people, in people who are overweight, in people with diabetes, and people with many health conditions. It's an extremely consistent finding that when people go on a low-fat vegan diet, and when I say vegan, I mean no animal products at all, and keeping, and also keeping the oily foods, the greasy stuff low too. They lose weight, and it varies from person to person, but roughly maybe a pound a week would be the typical average, half pound a week, something like that. That's very typical. And the experience of the diet also is people are nervous about it at first because they imagine if they go vegan, they're going to have to acquire a taste for folk music or wear tie-dyed clothes or something like that. But after about week 3, they realize, wait a minute, this is easy. I'm just not eating meat chili. I'm having bean chili. I'm not putting the meat sauce on my spaghetti. I'm putting the tomato sauce on my spaghetti. I'm having a vegetable curry instead of a chicken curry. It's like super easy. And that's a big surprise for people. The Mediterranean diet was really a surprise. First of all, people found it tedious. Unlike this idea that, it's so easy. The rules were you had to reduce your red meat, but increase your white meat. You were supposed to select oil over butter, and look at the ingredients in the foods that you're eating, because none of them are made with olive oil. They're all made with this, that, and the other thing. And what was particularly troubling is that the participants on average did not lose weight very much. After about 16 weeks, it was maybe half kilogram, something like that. And after 16 weeks of effort, many of the participants really felt kind of stuck. And then at that point, the crossover happened. And all the people who were had been Mediterranean up at that point, went vegan. And suddenly it was like the dam burst and they could get rid of that weight. And they thought that's a great relief. But the drama, Tom, I've got to tell you, was in the people who had been vegan. And then they went Mediterranean. They thought, wait a minute, what are you doing to me? I've lost my taste for chicken. I don't want that anymore. I've lost my taste for fish. Now you're telling me to eat those things. And we did, because it's a research study. We wanted them to follow the Mediterranean diet. And the weight started to come back. And the participants were angry, and they found the Mediterranean diet not particularly palatable, and it was not effective for weight loss. And the net result, when you just looked at what does the diet actually do, 16 weeks on each diet led to 6 kilogram weight loss on the vegan arm net, 0.0 on the Mediterranean diet net, which it was upsetting to the participants. When we look at lipids, total cholesterol, LDL, dropped really quite significantly, 18 points and 15 points, respectively, on the vegan diet. Both total and LDL dropped. But on the Mediterranean diet, they just don't drop very much, and that's because you're eating fish. Fish
Were
has
they eating,
cholesterol.
just out of interest, were they also eating egg yolks in particular?
Reduced eggs. We asked them to eat, I believe it was no more than 4 per week. But what you're thinking is right. Eggs are the biggest source of cholesterol in the diet, which is not the biggest driver of serum cholesterol, but it does add to it. But let's say you have Chinook salmon. It's got, serving of Chinook salmon's got virtually the same saturated fat intake as beef, something like that. And people think, well, it's got omega-3. It's got that too, in addition to the saturated fat. It's got no fiber. It has cholesterol too. And so it becomes really a disappointment for people. I will say this for the Mediterranean diet, though. Both diets caused a drop in blood pressure. And it was actually a little bit bigger in the Mediterranean diet group. I don't know quite why. But that was about the only point we could say with regard to weight loss and lipid control and overall satisfaction. The Mediterranean diet just didn't really stack up particularly well. And where I think this is really an issue, I was speaking with a man not too long ago who had serious vascular disease and he needed surgery, and he had surgery, and he had a complicated course. And he talked to his doctor about going vegan. And his doctor said, you don't need to do that. It's hard to follow. And a Mediterranean diet is just as good. This man's father was dead around age 50. He had a terrible history of cardiovascular disease. And he was told by his doctor, just do Mediterranean. And I saw him a year or so later. He hadn't lost any weight. His lipids weren't under control. He was on as many medications as he was on before. And I have to say, Tom, I think the jury has been in the room for some time and has rendered its verdict. And that his Mediterranean diets sound sexy, they sound easy to prescribe, and they might be very marginally better than what you're doing now. In the same way as if you're a 2-pack-a-day smoker and you cut to a pack and a half, marginally better. But I think it's a clinical error to prescribe a Mediterranean diet for someone for whom weight loss is a goal or for whom lipid control is a goal. And I think we need to just get beyond it and prescribe to the patient what is actually going to work.
And I think too that in particular the way that it's practiced, many people really don't even understand what would be whatever is an optimal form of a Mediterranean diet, and tend to focus on the oils and the more calorie dense items, and maybe a little bit too much wine. And your mentioning of how Predimed shifting over to more plant predominant form of Mediterranean, I think then helps give us a real kind of bottom line from this, without a question. The more minimally processed plants you can get into your body to address hunger, obviously we're not asking people to overeat and eat when not hungry, the better your metabolic results are going to be. I'm not exactly sure about the blood pressure either. Maybe it had something to do with sodium and so forth, but I've seen very much the same, including the taste bud rehab, where people are feeling that they're going to be missing something. And after going through a period of time and feeling so much better using a more plant predominant, minimally processed approach, they then have their dreamy, non-negotiable, whatever it is, only to find, wow, that just didn't taste anything like what I was expecting, which is a good thing, That would you say they went through something we might call, and our good friend David Katz might call taste bud rehab, as they were on the vegan arm?
I experienced this myself as a kid. One day my mother came into the house. I was maybe 13 or 14. She said, we're not having whole milk anymore. And she gave us this stuff called skim milk. And it looked kind of watery and almost blue. And we all hated it. But after about 2 or 3 weeks, we were totally adapted to the lower fat taste. And then by mistake, she got some whole milk, and we thought it tasted like cream or paint, and it was unpalatable. No, I'm not saying that skim milk is health food. I think we're better off without having any kind of milk at all. We don't need milk from a cow. But this experience taught me that the taste buds want today what they have been having in previous days. So if you're really high salt or high fat, if your diet is high salt, high fat over day after day after day, you will remember that taste and want that taste. But if you ratchet it down, you don't want it so much. I have a good friend who is involved in Mediterranean diets. And he says, oh, it's all that fat that makes your vegetables appealing and palatable. And I got to say, every time I fly through the Atlanta airport and I see the cafeteria where they got the vat of greens with hunks of pork in them, I think, no, that's not making it more palatable for me. It depends on what you're used to. And yes, taste retraining is a really good way to put it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this gives us a lot of great food for thought. And if someone wanted to connect with more information that you would be providing, what would be one good place that they could go, whether it's internet link or what have you, book or otherwise?
Yeah, well, thank you for asking. Our website is pcrm.org, stands for Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. We've got a free app for patients. It's called the 21-Day Vegan Kickstart. It's in English and Spanish, and it's got 21 days of menus and recipes and cooking videos and all kinds of things. And my most recent book is Your Body in Balance, all about how foods affect hormones.
Fantastic. Now, I don't know that we discussed, but my wife is from Bogota, Colombia, and my that whole side of the family, I might offer the in Spanish version of what you're talking about to them. That's wonderful. If you don't mind, maybe just a couple of other questions as we wind up here. First, we talked a lot about food and nutrition. What do you do for physical activity? What do you do to make the partner of the food part, the physical activity part? Admittedly, we're sitting through this, martyring ourselves just a bit for the benefits of people that are watching, and hopefully we'll get up and move around about the cabin, so to speak. So what does Dr. Barnard do to move around about the cabin, as they say, physical activity?
Yeah, I think physical activity is really important. And you know, it's not just good for your heart, it's really good for your brain. I got to say, I'm impressed with the Alzheimer's data showing that the more you get your blood oxygenating, the better off your old hippocampus is going to be. So when I'm at my best, I like to exercise every other day. And I like to run for about, I'm going to say about 3 miles or sometimes a little bit more than that. And for me, that kind of does it. Now I'm here in Washington, D.C., and sometimes our winter is totally uncooperative, and our gyms have been affected by the pandemic too. But that's really the thing I like to do.
And in terms of beyond the structured part or the dedicated time part, how might you, or how are you trying to address the breaking up of sitting time and so forth, the non-exercise activity time, I guess, as they say?
Yeah, I think my natural personality is a little bit sort of attention deficit type, where I work on something and I jump up and I go do something else, and it's I am not one of these people who stays absolutely rooted in place.
Great, fantastic. And I guess if you find yourself tapping your foot or something like that, anyone who's listening, it's probably your body telling you that it wants you to get up and move around.
Right.
Every little bit seems to count, we're learning. Now, I have to say, I discovered you are a rocker. You know, I mean, I thought I was alone. I was the only, the guy that jammed on the guitar and could really rock out. And Carbon Works, fantastic. Can you tell us a little bit about that side of you, that passion side of you when it comes to music?
Oh, Tom, thank you for asking about that. Yeah, my band is called Carbon Works, and actually I've had bands ever since I was a kid. The Beatles came in, and that was it for me. And all the way through medical school, I would have bands at night and so forth. But Carbon Works is a group of musicians from many parts of the world. And we get together and make music and videos and things like that. And you'll see them on YouTube at the Carbon Works channel. We've got quite a lot, and some new ones coming up later this year as well. And they're just all over the place. We have a wonderful singer from Italy, a new singer I'm working with in Germany, and some American singers and some Vietnamese musicians and all kinds of folks. And it's kind of indescribable in a way, but the roots are back in kind of my own rock and roll teenage years, but they kind of branch off in other directions, as I know you have too. Because sometime, Tom, I got to have you record with us, because you have the greatest voice of any doctor I have ever heard.
Thank you. I was not expecting that. I will see maybe if there are any pipes left in me. Thank you so much. I wonder, by the way, you should really check out Carbon Works. Great high energy. I really appreciated that. And you mentioned something, and I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but when you mentioned the Beatles, how can we not just give a moment to Paul McCartney and his efforts and the way that his lifestyle is in terms of being a vegetarian? What do you know about the Paul McCartney story at all? What little highlights can you give us as far as, man, that not just inspired us with music, but, for some of us, inspire us by how he eats?
Well, Paul often tells a story about how he and Linda were sitting there looking out the window at the lambs frolicking in the field, and then looking down at the lamb chop in front of them. And they put two and two together. And he's been obviously a strong vegetarian advocate ever since. And Linda certainly was as well. And it's an unfortunate thing that in our Western culture, we apologize for having compassion. We apologize for having ethics. A doctor would say, well, I'm vegan, but for health reasons, as if you don't want to slit somebody's throat. That's something that means you're not going to be tough or manly or something like that. And I think we have to get over this macho adolescent idea and remember that to be decent and kind in this short life that we have is really a virtue. And that means being good to each other, good to our employees and trainees, being decent to the animals that we share this planet with, and being decent to the planet itself. I know what I'm talking about. When I was a kid, my dad grew up in the cattle business. And although he left it, he didn't like raising cattle, and he became the diabetes expert for Fargo, North Dakota. We drove cattle to slaughter because they were his brother's cattle and my cousin's cattle and that kind of thing. And I hid in the weeds in North Dakota outside of the marshes, and we would kill the geese and ducks that were coming out of Canada to try to stay warm in the winter. And we all thought that was normal, and it was for our culture. But as I grew up a little bit, I started to realize that there's a better way to live your life, and your coronary arteries appreciate it too.
And we appreciate you. That was wonderful. From science to food to rock and roll. That was great. Dr. Barnard, thank you so much for taking the time to be part of News of the Day, noted here on behalf of the True Health Initiative. And I look forward to staying in touch with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tom.